one of the things I want to talk about today, I think, is one of the best evidences in favor of creation is a finely tuned universe. So I'm going to read a little bit from my book called Evolution Shot Full of Holes, which was co-authored with Frank Sherwin. And so there's a small section on the Anthropic Principle. So we'll kind of go through it a little bit. In 1986, the controversial book, The Anthropic Cosmological Principle by John Barrow and Frank Tipler was published. In this book, Barrow, a cosmologist scientist, pioneered what he called the Anthropic Principle in order to deal with the seemingly incredible coincidences that allow for our presence in a universe that appears to be perfectly set up for our existence. So I'd like you to explain what is the Anthropic Principle.
It's basically the notion that the universe appears to be designed for life, and human life in particular, which of course, as creationists, yeah, that's what we would expect, isn't it? God made the earth to be inhabited, and he made the universe to support the earth and to be for signs, seasons, days, and years. And so naturally we live in a universe that's designed for life. My secular colleagues look at that principle in different ways.
Okay.
They would say, well, it's the principle that the universe seems to be designed for life. There's a couple different forms, the weak and the strong anthropic principle. Others would say, well, the anthropic principle simply points out that unless the universe happens to be conducive to life, we wouldn't be here to notice it. And so they take that and they take it in a different way than we would. But we all agree that the universe at least appears to be designed for life. And the creationists would say that's because it is.
Absolutely. Okay, so I want to talk about some of these principles or some of these elements. So everything from the particular energy state of the electron to the exact level of the weak nuclear force seems to be tailored for us to exist. So what is the energy state of the electron? What do you mean by that? Why is that so critical?
Yeah, well, that could be reference to the fact that the charge of the electron, for example, exactly matches the charge of the proton, but is in the opposite polarity. And that's crucial because the electromagnetic forces are very, very strong. And it turns out that, for example, if electrons, let's say, had 1% more charge than protons, suppose we had the same number of electrons and protons in our bodies. Right now, the force between you and me, the repelling force, because we both have slight negative charge, would be sufficient to blow both of us into orbit. It's amazing. And so the fact that you have these negatively charged electrons and an equal number, apparently, of positively charged protons in the universe, isn't that interesting? And the fact that they have exactly the same charge but the opposite polarity, amazing, amazing. I mean, it's exactly balanced. And of course, electrons, because of that charge and because of their other properties, their wavelength and such, they orbit at certain distances in protons, and that's what makes atoms possible. So there are lots of things just about the electron that have to be just so in order for atoms to even exist.
And just the laws of nature themselves just seem to be like, where did they come from? You're talking about this balance between electrons and protons, and so where did that come from? So just by chance, it just happened to be lucky to provide this exact balance?
Laws of nature in particular, I think, is extremely powerful confirmation of biblical creation, because there is no reason to expect laws in a chance universe at all.
That is my point. I just totally, if people really understood this, it's like their argument ends here.
And the fact that these laws are organized into nice, neat little equations like E equals mc squared, that's awfully convenient, isn't it?
It sure is.
It's
it's
elegant,
designed, simple, yes.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And so I've pointed out to my secular colleagues that that principle, and they don't have a good explanation for it. They say, well, that's just the way it is. And I said, well, yeah,
we're here, therefore.
But why would you expect that in your view? How can your view account for that fact? How can you make sense of it? Given the infinite number of possibilities, how can you account for laws at all, laws of nature in particular, without a lawgiver in your view? Why are they the same everywhere? There's a question most secularists don't think that. They assume that. The field of astronomy would be impossible if it weren't for that assumption. I have a reason for it. My God is sovereign over the entire universe. And so the way he upholds the universe here is going to be the same he does in the Andromeda Galaxy. And so I can answer that question. Why is it laws of nature don't change with time? Everything else in the universe seems to change with time. It's expanding and stars, explode and things like that.
Fascinating.
Why is it laws of nature
question.
don't?
Yeah.
My secular colleagues can't
they...
answer that. They can't answer that. They assume that laws of nature will be the same tomorrow as they are today. They act on it, but they have no reason for it on their own worldview. I, as a Christian, can account for that. God promises a certain amount of stability in the universe that He created. Genesis 8:22, God promises the basic cycles of nature will be in the future as they have been in the past. Secularists have no explanation for it, but they assume it when they do science. And so you see, whenever anybody's doing science, they are tacitly relying on creation principles in order for it to even be possible. And then they turn around and say, well, science disproves the Bible. It couldn't. If it did, then you wouldn't have the scientific principles there to begin with.
Yeah. One of the things that really bothers me a lot, I guess, is as I interact with evolutionists or read materials or so on, debates. They'll oftentimes throw out that it's the evolutionists, that all the evidence is in favor of evolution. But when we look at something like this, you go, well, where is the favor in evolution from the laws of the universe? They just
don't have an answer.
They do not add up at all. Okay, so going on a little further, the exact level of the weak nuclear force. What is that?
So there are four, as far as we know, fundamental forces in the universe. There's gravity, with which we're all familiar, keeps us on Earth. Okay. There's the electromagnetic force, which is responsible for things like magnets when they, you push two close together if they're opposite, and they turn around and snap, and so on. So those are two that people are familiar with. And there are two others that only act on very small scales, and most people don't know about them because we don't notice them on the scales of things much larger than atoms. And those are the weak and the strong nuclear forces. So
yes.
There are two.
Heard about that.
And one of the reasons why we believe that, for example, there's a strong nuclear force is because protons are held together in the core of an atom. And protons would want to, they're like charged. They're both positively charged, and so they should repel each other if electromagnetism was the only force there. Right? Because gravity's not near strong enough to keep them together. So there must be a force even stronger than the electromagnetic force, and that is the strong nuclear force. And then there's a similar one called the weak nuclear force, which is still much stronger than gravity and stronger than electromagnetism. It's just weaker than the strong nuclear force, so it's weak by comparison. And those two forces have to be tuned just right, or atoms aren't possible. If you make the strong force, there's some variance. You can change it a bit, and you still have atoms be possible. But if, for example, if the strong force were weaker than electromagnetic force, atoms would not be possible. You couldn't have the nucleus of, except for hydrogen, you couldn't have nucleus of an atom.
I understand that the window of opportunity is extremely narrow, that this is an example where the universe is extremely fine-tuned, like paper thin.
Well, particularly with the the weak nuclear force, because that's responsible for that's responsible for radioactive decay. And so when some atoms spontaneously decay into other atoms, that's the weak force that's responsible for that. You change that too much, either everything in the universe unravels or nothing does. I mean, it's
or
very
maybe it's too fast.
Yeah. So again, the atoms would not necessarily be stable if you tamper with these forces too much. And I don't know what the range is, but I know that it's not very much. It's not very much that you can adjust this. And I wouldn't say it's zero either. In fact, some creation physicists believe that God changed the strong nuclear force a bit, either during creation or during the flood year, to account for the fact that there's good evidence that radioactive decay rates are not constant. And that's one way you could change that. But the fact that it's a relatively small change that'll accomplish that. And so you do it too much, atoms can't exist anymore.
So are we saying that certain creation scientists are saying that God changed the laws of this particular law?
Well, I think they're saying that it's not the law that's changing per se, but it's what we consider to be a constant. There are certain things in nature that have a particular value, and we don't know why they have that value. Like there's a constant for the nuclear force. There's the Coulomb force, and so on. There's a certain constants, and we're not sure why they have that particular value. So the law would still apply, but the constant that's in that equation, God could have tweaked that a little bit. Now, God's allowed to do that if He wants to. That's not a problem. He's promised us a certain degree of stability in nature, but He hasn't promised us infinite stability in nature. And so He is able to, if He wanted to change His laws, He could certainly do that. But it would be a temporary thing anyway, because He has promised us that the basic cycles of nature will be in the future as they have been in the past. But He might tweak one of the constants. There's no reason why He can't do that. He's God.
Okay. All right. We live in a universe of numerous variables where only a slight change would cause all reality to literally fall apart. And yet, here we are. The Anthropic Principle states that the reason we are here to ponder this question is all due to the fact that all the correct variables are in place. So it's just, I guess, another way of saying the same thing you've already said, that it all works because God placed it in order. It just seems to really connect with as God as designer.
Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you how my secular colleagues will try to answer that.
Okay.
Because they'll say, well, if the universe weren't that way, we wouldn't be here to observe it.
That's right. Yeah, it's
they try to answer that. But that is it's called the fallacy of irrelevant thesis. And that's where a person answers a question that seems like, well, yeah, that's right. It is true. If the universe weren't designed for life, we wouldn't be here to observe it. But that was not the question I'm asking. The question I'm asking is, why does it have that particular nature? Not why are we here to observe it? So they've answered the wrong question. That's the fallacy of irrelevant thesis. It'd be kind of like if there was a plane crash and I was the sole survivor of that plane crash, and a reporter came up to me and said, well, Dr. Lisle, how is it that you alone were able to survive that crash? If I said, well, because if I hadn't, you wouldn't be able to ask me the question. I mean, that answers nothing about why I was able to survive the crash. It's true that I wouldn't be able to answer your question, but it says nothing about why I actually survived. Likewise, when they say,
use that
yeah, they use it all the
frequently.
time, and it's a fallacy. It's just nothing but a fallacy. So it seems to me a good answer as to why the universe looks designed is because it is.
So Stephen Hawking has come up with a multiverse.
Yes.
Now, it seems to me that if I was to read a dictionary, maybe a dictionary from a few years back, it would have said something like that the universe is all that there is. So how can you have multiple all that there is?
Well, you can. Universe, one and many, uni meaning one and verse meaning many. And that's reflective of the nature of God because God is one and more than one. And he's built that in to the universe. Our triune God has done that. Yeah, you can't really have more than one universe, otherwise it's just a bigger universe. But that's the latest claim that they'll try and use. That's some secular physicists will try to use that to get around the Anthropic Principle. They'll say, well, it turns out that there's an infinite number of universes. We happen to be in one of the lucky ones that just happen to be right. That's a form of the gambler's.
Has all of these finely tuned factors
Yes, that's a form of the gambler's
perfectly.
fallacy. It'd be like if I won the lotto, or if I flipped a coin and it happened to land heads up 10 times in a row, which is very improbable. I'd say, well, logically there must be millions of other rooms where people are trying this right now, and they're just not getting it right. It doesn't follow logically. I mean, if we got lucky, fine. But it doesn't imply the existence of other universes. There are other reasons why they try to invoke multiverse, but that's one of them. That's one of them. It makes it sound more reasonable then that we live in this very finally apparently designed universe, and yet it allows them in their own minds to escape the obvious conclusion that they have a creator.
So you open the door. Is there any scientific reason for a multiverse? Do they provide some rationale to this whole notion?
I don't think so, no. Because all the laws of physics, I mean, they'll try to take laws of physics and extrapolate that, and they'll say, well, quantum fluctuation in our was how our universe was produced and so on. But once you extrapolate laws of physics describe how our universe behaves. There's no logical reason to extrapolate that to how another universe would behave, right? And so they're taking principles that are designed to apply in this situation and applying them in a situation that they were never designed to apply in, and they think that's somehow rational, but it really isn't. If there are other universes, I mean, I'll entertain the hypothetical possibility that God could have created other universes. It's by definition unscientific, because there's no way we can observe or experiment on them, because they're separate from our universe. We can only have access to our universe.
It's only a philosophical argument.
You can make all the philosophical arguments you want, but it's certainly not science.
Certainly not. So I'm sure that everyone would really like to get a better explanation of what is the Big Bang. Can you give an explanation so that common, ordinary people can understand the atheistic view of what is the Big Bang? And it's probably changed over the years. We've just had a conversation with Russ Humphreys, and he has his cosmological view. And so I'd like you to explain Big Bang and maybe some other things related to that.
Okay, yeah, the Big Bang is basically the secular idea of how the universe could come into existence. And people have said, well, it was promoted by someone who believed in God. It was invented by someone who believed in God. That's true. The inventor of the Big Bang did believe in God, but he had a philosophy that you should leave God out of your science. And so which I disagree with, because if God is involved in the universe, we ought to consider that. In fact, it's what makes science possible, as we pointed out
So
previously.
which scientist are we referring to?
Lemaitre, George Lemaitre.
I see.
And yeah, in 1931, he decided that maybe the universe came from a point and expanded. Actually, his previous idea, which I like his previous idea, it was in the late 20s. He said that the universe is actually being stretched out or expanded. And I think that's compatible with the Bible and even maybe suggested in the Bible in places like Isaiah 40:22, for example. So I think that's reasonable. And his original idea was that God had created the universe and then stretched it out. Well, yeah, that's right. I think that's about right.
Now
but then in 31, he said, well, if we extrapolate backwards, because let's not assume that God created supernaturally or anything like that. If we just extrapolate backwards, then everything goes back to a point, and so maybe, and you can't figure out what happens before that. So we'll call that the beginning. And he says, so maybe the universe popped into existence billions of years ago. And the model has been changed quite drastically since then. Okay. But the basic idea is
because in
the same.
his model, there had to have been a center and an edge.
I think so. I think in his view, now that's not the way physicists would look at it today. Physicists today would say that the universe, see, people think of the Big Bang as an explosion within space, but that's not the way that physicists would look at it.
Okay.
People who support the model would say, no, it's a rapid expansion of space itself. And so rather than having all the matter compact into a point with empty space around it, they would say, no, even the empty space is compacted into that point. And that's a little bit hard for us to grasp. So if you were to ask a secularist, where did the Big Bang happen? He would say everywhere. Because all of space...
All at the same time.
Yeah, everywhere and all time was together. All of space was together in this point, which is called singularity. And then it rapidly expands out like a balloon, carries the matter with it. So the surface of the balloon, which is two-dimensional, would be an analog for the three dimensions of our universe. And I actually kind of like that analogy, except there's no reason in my mind to take it all the way back to a point. Why would you do that? Scripture indicates that the earth was created, the heavens and the earth was already in it. So apparently the universe was big already when God made it. Okay. He may have stretched it since then, but I find no logical reason to think that it began from a point. But that's driven by the philosophy that you have to leave God out of it, you see. And so you just run it back, and well, you can't go back beyond a point anyway, so they're stuck with that.
Do you accept the idea that redshift is an indication of an expanding universe?
I think it is. Yeah, I think it is. There are a number of different things that can cause, well, there are only really three things that we know of that can cause redshift. There's a gravitational redshift, there's a velocity moving away, and then there's an stretching of space. And stretching of space and velocity produce the same effect. And we can't figure out any way that a gravitational redshift would increase with distance. It should do the opposite for gravitation. So basically, in terms of known physics, that's the only thing that could cause the kind of redshifts that we see out in space. So it's Hubble law type relationship, where the farther away a galaxy is, the more redshifted it is. Only an expanding universe will cause that. Now, there could be unknown physics. That's certainly possible. We haven't discovered everything yet. But based on known physics, that's our best guess. I think that's very reasonable.
So have you had a chance to look through telescopes and to see redshift personally?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I look through telescopes all the time.
Okay.
And redshift's not normally something you'd see with your eye. You'd need an instrument, a spectroscope. Okay. And I've used those as well. And they break down the light into a spectrum. And then there's these little black lines in the spectrum, and they'll be shifted one way or the other. And for galaxies, they're almost always shifted toward the red, except for very nearby galaxies.
And have you looked in all directions, and then you've seen redshift in all directions?
Yeah, collectively, we scientists have looked. Yeah, we've looked at different galaxies, and it turns out that no matter which way you look, everything's redshifted.
Carl Sagan, he was famous for teaching people about evolution, cosmology, and he has this PBS show called Cosmos. Do you know what cosmos means?
The universe, basically.
An ordered universe.
An ordered universe, yeah.
I just find that to be ironic. That here he has a show about an ordered universe, and what does that imply? That there's order in the universe, you have a finely tuned universe, you have, where does order come from? Well, it comes from an orderer.
Yeah.
Where could that orderer, who could that be other than intelligence, God, whom we...
Yeah, of course they're remaking that series now with Neil deGrasse Tyson, so they'll have updated special effects and indoctrinate a whole new generation.
I see.
So I appreciate you letting me set the record straight on some of these things. But,
absolutely.
Yeah, because we do live in a universe that makes sense in light of what the Bible teaches. The laws that we have, they make sense. And secularists, they take that stuff for granted. They study the universe as if it's designed, as if they expect it to obey laws that do not change with time or with position, and then they turn around and say, "Oh, the universe is just chance," and that's inconsistent.
Yes.
It really is. It shows it in their heart of hearts. They
Another
really do know
logical
God.
fallacy. Yeah.
It is, yeah.
Just in their whole style of how they do science. All right. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thanks.
All right.